Malazan. The Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. Malazan. Malazan. How do you say it? Why is it called Malazan? Why is it a Book of the Fallen? I don't know yet. We're getting there. What is the series about? Who do you follow? Who are your characters? What are these books? 10 huge books. About what? Is it super difficult? Isn't it like the most difficult thing in the world to read these books? No, it ain't. If I love like Brandon Sanderson and George R.R. Martin and Robin Hobb, will I love Malazan? Probably. Maybe not. Definitely maybe. If I've never really read fantasy, but I read a lot of other stuff, will I like the Malazan Book of the Fallen? Perhaps. Possibly. Definitely maybe. Welcome back to StoryToob, everybody. So here's another Malazan video for all you Malazan nerds and for all you non-Malazan nerds, the prospective Malazan nerds, Malazan Marines. I'm here today to provide a somewhat informal sales pitch on the Malazan videos because it's quite a difficult thing on the internet to find just a general overview of what these books are without diving right into the meat and potatoes of it all. If anyone's considering picking up these books, or if you've been mildly curious or you're a little intimidated, the discourse around these books online can be quite off-putting sometimes. If you just want a quick sales pitch, I'll try to keep this video fairly quick, but I want to go over a couple of things in this video about how people talk about Malazan, and also just what is this series? What is it about? And what makes it different from other fantasy series? What makes it so seemingly difficult to talk about online, at least in the online circles? Also, how maybe your expectations might play a factor if you do end up reading these books, and maybe cases of what you read, reading broadly, fantasy readers versus readers of whatever. Will that affect your potential enjoyment of the Malazan series? I'll try to cover some of that stuff in this video, and also like little bits about little techniques that I've noticed Erikson is doing. I'm currently halfway through the series myself, so I'm a newish reader, new reader this year. So I figured maybe I might be a decent voice for getting new people into Malazan. And again, all of the videos that I've made, they've just been review videos so far, have been with the purpose of smashing this notion that these books are so impenetrable and difficult to read, and this is just such a huge, sprawling world that won't make any sense. Bullshit. I'm telling you right now, if I can read all of this stuff, you can too. I go full in depth on a lot of things and sort of heady themes and all this stuff in some of my review videos, but I wanted to make this video so that it's a little more palatable, a little more enticing than getting right into the meat and potatoes, like I said. So, first of all, the big question to tackle here is, what is the Malazan Book of the Fallen? What is it about? I am 5 books in, and here's my take. The Malazan Book of the Fallen is a fairly unconventionally structured, very conventional epic high fantasy series. Allow me to elaborate. These books present us with a secondary fantasy world, an epic high fantasy world, where Erikson doesn't shy away from magic and history and anthropology and all of these different cultures and races, and there's not just humans and elves and whatever. There are dinosaurs with knives for hands in these books. There are maniacal possessed puppets that fling fireballs at floating cities in the sky. It's nuts. These books are crazy. But Erikson writes a tale, a story, several tales about disparate groups of people just living and being and fighting and surviving in this world. So we don't necessarily have one overarching plot that is evident at the beginning. There is one, and it certainly develops over time, but it's not telegraphed to you right at the beginning. There are a lot of individual stories that build up to sort of a major thematic element in each book, and everybody plays a part. Every story plays a part in that theme and what that book is saying. But the general premise of the first book, at least, and the subsequent books, is that the Malazan Empire from Malaz City are expanding their empire, and you get kind of every level, every perspective on this war of expansion, from those being conquered to those doing the conquering, to those running the conquerors, to those just the grunt military level. On all sides, the forgotten cultures in the forgotten lands that get involved in all of this stuff. You get the historical context of the world and how it was built. All that sort of stuff comes into play. And there are gods in the background pulling the strings, and there might be a nefarious one pulling some other strings and playing the long game. And that is the basic gist of the books so far. You hop around in continents, and you hop around with casts of characters in each book. So in book one, you might get a cast of characters, and they interweave until they all sort of crash together. This is a common device that he uses in all the books. He'll start off with disparate plot lines and disparate characters, and there's a lot of named characters, but with a bit of time and patience, you really do fall into a groove with it. And he always sort of plays to a convergence at the end of each book. And each storyline with each cast of characters kind of represent an idea or a theme that he wants to explore in each book. And basically each book will have something to say about a topic, or several things to say about a couple of topics. And the characters will mirror this. And then the characters will also mirror each other in their journeys, or they'll go in parallel, or circle around the same point, or arrive at the same point and veer off in different directions. All of it is sort of meticulously crafted to create several stories that make up the tapestry of this world. If that all sounds a bit too complicated for you, then maybe these aren't the books for you. The point is that it's a fairly unconventional structure for a lot of quite conventional fantasy storylines. There are a lot of conventional fantasy storylines in these books that are hidden under Erickson's archaeological writing style. He does require that you dig a little for this kind of stuff, but that's why I think these books are so good. He's constantly commenting on the fantasy genre, on the state of fiction in general, on its forms, on its structures, on its archetypes, on characters, on how information is conveyed to readers. He's playing with all of this sort of stuff, but honestly, if you start to see the things that he's poking at or playing with in his little sandbox, or his massive sandbox, enriches the experience. And then you can see the more conventional stories underneath the sort of layers of commentary that he's doing. And then also on a thematic level, people always talk about compassion in these books, and it's absolutely a theme. What do we mean by that, I hear you ask? Basically, compassion is just an ultimate message of what he wants to say. And like any, in my opinion, good book worth reading, these themes develop over time, and they develop with spending time with characters, with storylines, and with things decisions that people make, and how it conveys their beliefs, their values, and their approach to relationships with other people. And I think, like any good literature, this just develops over time, and it takes patience. And I think this kind of stuff doesn't make these books difficult, it just makes them a little different to large quantities of fantasy that's published. And not just fantasy, this happens in a lot of fiction and genre fiction specifically as well, where a lot of authors who get published will hit the paint by numbers beats of that genre. This is especially true with fantasy and with thrillers, that you'll have here's your A plot, your B plot, you need to hit this beat, you need to hit that, we need to join with the farm boy at the beginning, and all is peaceful in the village until somebody nefarious or somebody from the outside comes and wrecks the buzz, wrecks the normality of life. And then we set off on the quest and we meet people along the way and we need to defeat the evil lord, and all of that context at the beginning is sort of given to you. And the same with thrillers, where you'll have a certain situation with somebody ordinary thrust into an extraordinary situation. There's a kidnapping and they take matters into their own hands, and the police get in the way, and maybe the law enforcement is corrupt and there's somebody that is covering things up on a grander level. All of that stuff are just genre conventions and storytelling conventions, and Erikson plays with all of them. You can kind of tell that Erikson is well read in a lot of stuff outside of fantasy as well, and I just appreciate seeing that too. So if all of that stuff interests you, give the books a go. But I do want to talk about that context then for a second, and kind of how he's telling his stories. So context is a big thing that I think fantasy readers will struggle with the Malazan Book of the Fallen. But here's why I think you should stick with it. I've noticed in online discourse about these books that people don't know what the fuck's going on. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But I would challenge people when they say that. It's not that you don't know what is going on. I think you don't know why it's going on. Erikson plays with context, and he plays with the amount of context that he gives you. And there's a reason for it, because you might change perception the more context you get. And if he gives you all of the context up front, he's telling you to feel a certain way up front. I find that this happens quite often in fantasy fiction, where you get a lot of the context in the first 100 pages. You know who you're supposed to be rooting for, you know who the bad guy is, it's all very well set up and established, and this is the journey we're following. And I find that I tend to run out of steam with a lot of those stories just because I know where it's going. I never know where these books are going. The Malazan books are just unconventional in the level of context that they give you compared to other fantasy books. That is not me saying that I don't like those other fantasy books. There's good stuff and there's bad stuff within those conventions. I'm thinking along the lines of Tad Williams is amazing at writing that traditional epic fantasy, and I've yet to read on in his stuff, but at least in his first trilogy, I kind of know where a lot of things are going. There'll be things along the way that you don't know, the intricacies of subplots, but the grander scheme of things, you kind of know what's going on. This could be said even for a series that I love, John Gwynn's Faithful and the Fallen. It's a very predictable series. It's extremely paint by numbers in terms of its archetypes and its conventions. But he does it very, very well. And that's absolutely fine. The thing with Erikson, and this doesn't mean that Erikson is better than those writers, it just means he's doing it a little differently. And I don't think it makes him more difficult to read, it just means he's doing it a little differently. He will withhold context from you. He gives you just enough in terms of describing visually what you're seeing, and also describing wacky shit, which might take some adjustment for you because he goes full on with the high fantasy and the magic. I mentioned the talking puppets and the flying cities in the sky. It's full on high fantasy. But let's say you start at book 1, Gardens of the Moon. You don't know what's going on in the first couple of chapters in terms of the why, but you know that you're seeing various groups of people fighting a battle at a siege in a city, in a continent, in this magic world. Cool. And you follow along and you trust him to pull you in, and maybe you start to get invested in some of the characters, but you still don't know why people are making the decisions that they are. but maybe that's the point he's trying to make. By the end of Gardens of the Moon, you might have 80% context of why people were doing what they were doing in that book, but in the grander scheme of the whole series, you're at 5% context. And then in book 2, you might have to restart because he introduces a whole new group of characters. It's in the same world, it has the same feeling, but you're going to another continent. And then by the end of Deadhouse Gates, you might get 80% of the context of that particular book, and then you're at 10% for the series. Do you see what I'm saying? He kind of incrementally increases that context on a grander scale, but sometimes you need to reset with each book, and then they all start to coalesce. Now, I'm only at book 5, so I've only read 5 books. Midnight Tide's review to come soon, and I feel like I am still getting huge swathes of context that are giving me fuel and incentive to go forward and recontextualizing what I've read before, which is why a lot of people talk about reread value in this series. I do not think you have to reread these books to enjoy them or understand them, but I think they are inherently ripe for reread because of the nature of how he plays with context. A really superficial sales pitch for the series is a couple of D&D players get really, really high, have all of the possible permutations and computations of a campaign or a storyline in a secondary world that is humanly possible, but there's a ton of artistic depth and literary value and things that are being explored in a literary way through theme, character, plot devices, mirroring, poetic justice, artistic prose, philosophical musings, all of that kind of stuff with the window dressing of complete bananas fantasy. Fun. These books are really fun. I said it in my Gardens of the Moon review, and I don't think this aspect of the books really get enough credit online, but Erikson has fun with these books and he makes them fun to read. And even if you don't have a ton of context of why things are happening at the beginning, he still writes stuff that's ridiculously fun to read. And I think you just gotta roll with it. So I think if you're interested in trying the books, I think you can read the first 2 or the first 3 together, because they represent everything that's really great about the series. I'm 5 books in, so I still have to read the second half of the main 10 books, but I have a good grasp of what these books are now. Erikson loves to play with convergence and everything converging. All of the stuff that, for example, Marvel fans, or like I'm a comic book reader, I also like the MCU, and all of the connections and that satisfying storytelling when it's done well can be really cool to get into and sink your teeth into and theorize. And, you know, A Song of Ice and Fire fans, Game of Thrones, Sanderson fans, Stormlight fans, what's the big world called, the Cosmere, all of those connections and character moments that might have an effect over there in that other book, and then you start to build this tapestry. Malazan will tick your box for that. It is absolutely incredible for that kind of stuff. And I know a lot of people on the BookTube sphere and people who watch BookTube videos like that kind of stuff. Malazan might make you work for that a little bit. It might challenge you. There's a lot of characters. But I think Erikson will always reinforce when you really need to pay attention and when you kind of don't need to know something. So you need to kind of let him take control of the ship and you're just along for the ride. To give a quick pitch of that first 3, that sort of, it's almost a trilogy in a sense. Gardens of the Moon is in the continent of Genabakis. The Malazan army are going to Darujistan to conquer it and to take it for the Malazan Empire. Then you have a cast of characters that are in Darujistan, Thieves Guild, mages, all of this kind of shadowy organization, political intrigue type of stuff. There's assassins. And then you have a cast of sort of rogue marines that are also going to the city. And you've got a floating city in the sky with a big badass sword and sorcery, almost villainous looking type of dude with a big sword that collects souls like Elric. And all of them are going to converge at the end of the book in a masquerade ball. It's wonderful. Deadhouse Gates is a bit like the movie The Mummy, but in the Malazan world, where a lot of people are going across the desert to find this magic book that is going to release this ancient power, and a convergence will happen at the center of it, and it's all about a rebellion against the Malazan Empire. And then the third book is kind of a sequel to both of those books, and it again reconverges all of that stuff. And that of course continues on. Book 2 has more of a connection then to book 4, but that's the general pitch of the first 3. And if you want to give those a go and you find that you like it, and you find that maybe you like some bits more than others, some people don't like Gardens of the Moon but like Deadhouse Gates, some people are the opposite, there's kind of something for everyone in the Malazan books. If you like military fantasy, it's really heavy on that. I don't like those aspects quite as much as other people. When we're focusing a lot on Marines just walking, I struggle with it because it goes on. But I really, really love all of the other stuff with the magic and the lore and the history and the digging into it and the thematic richness of characters' stories and how he uses those characters to get his messages across or to explore ideas and let you form a message for yourself. I think the main thing is, like I said, just go along for the ride. Don't try to control every aspect of the series in terms of absolute understanding, because it's going to evolve and change and adapt itself. And you're going to adapt and change what you think about information as the books progress and as the story progresses. And everything is going to recontextualize as you go. I'm halfway through the series, and I know that, well, firstly, I don't know where it's going to go. I don't even know who else I'm going to meet. I don't know how everything I've perceived thus far is going to change by the time I get to book 10. I just know that I'm along for the ride. There are things that I don't understand from the first 5 books. That, oh, there was a chapter there, I didn't really know what happened or why that happened, but I'll find out. And that's cool. That's kind of why I read. And then for me personally, I love seeing all the influences on Erikson, or at least trying to spot what might have influenced him outside of fantasy. Like in the first book, that Gardens of the Moon to me is structured like a typical political thriller, and I loved seeing it, which is kind of the same Erikson himself describes taking the structure of Dune, which is a science fiction novel, but that is a heavily politically charged science fiction novel that is written in a style of a lot of political thrillers, or even like noir stuff. And there's elements of swashbuckling, Three Musketeers, revenge tales, Count of Monte Cristo type of stuff. And just seeing those influences on things. Book 4 takes from like Conan the Barbarian pretty overtly. Seeing those bits of influence and how he's commenting on that kind of storytelling is part of the fun for me. And if you're into that kind of thing as well, these books will absolutely scratch that itch. If you're just a book nerd, these will absolutely scratch your itch. If you love really, really high fantasy and magic that is awe-inspiring and mysterious, and you want to learn about the lore and the connections here and there, and you're the kind of person that takes note of characters and houses and different aspects of magic and who can channel what type of magic and blah blah blah, and what that might mean or the implications for the series going forward because of it, this will absolutely tick your box. If you love to get invested in characters, I think you're gonna need some adjustment in the first book to situate yourself and say, okay, I don't need to understand everything, and you go along for the ride. I think you will actually, by the end of that first book, have characters to latch onto, and from then on, he goes deep, and he'll break your heart, he will make you laugh, He will have fun, and he will do it all with a really, really wonderfully rich cast of characters. So anyway, I don't know if any of this was at all coherent, but I just wanted to chat about Malazan in a sort of vaguely superficial overview kind of way. And again, like I've said in all my videos up to this point, this series is not difficult to read. It's dense, it demands a bit of work from you, but it's not difficult. It will take time, patience, commitment, I guess, to read big, beefy 1,200-page books. But if you sit down and go along for the ride and just ride the wave, you'll get there, especially if you're predisposed to liking fantasy. I think these books have kind of everything you're looking for. If you agree or disagree with anything that I've said in this video, comment down below. I'd love to chat more about this kind of stuff. I just think the dialogue around the Malazan books, specifically on BookTube and on kind of online in these circles that I've found myself in, is sometimes quite misleading. These books are portrayed as big, heady, impenetrable books. I don't think they're like that. I don't even think you need to delve into all of the complexity of them to enjoy them, which for me makes for good books. They're still super fun to read, and I just wanted to, I guess, add my own voice to that side of the conversation and encourage more people to just give them a go. And if you don't like them, that's absolutely fine. Taste is completely separate from how these books are written and all that kind of stuff. Like, you may not like the style, you may not like having to sort of excavate for certain information or wait for it for 1,000 pages or all of this kind of stuff. You may not dig it, or it may just be exactly your cup of tea. If you like this video, give it a like. If you're new here, I have a load of other Malazan videos. If you're interested, subscribe. Midnight Tides review will be dropping soon. And yeah, I'll chat to you in the comments.